Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we're doing a VCT EMEA season preview for the team, Gentlemates. Gentlemates were the team that made it out of the Ascension Tier 2 tournament to make it into the Tier 1 EMEA Franchise League. They are a team out of France. They played in the VCL French split. In both splits, they got first place. Then, of course, they won the EMEA Ascension and placed first place in that. So, first place placements all throughout 2023, very strong year for this team. I personally wasn't paying too much attention to the EMEA Ascension, but from what I heard, it doesn't seem like Gentlemates were the favorites going into that tournament. It seemed like both Ascend and Apex were kind of seen as the top two teams, but both teams lost to Gentlemates. So was that a flash in the pan? Was that just one tournament where they were doing very well? Or is that a teaser of what's to come, and will they continue to dominate and look like a Tier 1 team? They have had a very quiet offseason. They haven't played in any offseason tournaments, and they haven't really made a lot of roster changes either. Players out is just Apo, who barely played last year. He was their extra man. Players in, no one. They don't have an extra man at this point. They just have the roster that won Ascension. Championships won by the org. This is Tier 1 championships are 0. 2023 MVP was I chose Takaz. He has the best stats out of everyone. He was a very good duelist player for them. Looking at the 2023 stats for all these players, starting with Takaz, he had 1,348 kills, 1,030 deaths, 230 assists for KD ratio of 1.30. He played Jet, Raze, KO, and Neon. So he was their main duelist player last year, and it seemed to be very effective on that role. A 1.30 KD ratio is very good. That might be a bit inflated by them being obviously the best team in France. Does Takaz keep that KD ratio against Tier 1 competition? I'd be very surprised, because that would put him in conversation for like top 5 in the world. So I don't expect him to keep those numbers, but he should still be a respectable part of this team. Moving on to Beas, who is the IGL of this team. He had 948 kills, 966 deaths, 574 assists for KD ratio of 1.01. He played Initiator last year, playing Skye, Sova, Fade, and KO. So solid numbers for an Initiator player, just above 1 for the KD ratio. Solid numbers, and he seemed to be a solid IGL for them last year, so he's going to have to adjust to the Tier 1 competition with that IGL ability, but he seems like a respectable player. Moving on to Whalers, he had 1,031 kills, 1,014 deaths, 571 assists for KD ratio of 1.01. He was their smokes player, playing Astra, Omen, Viper, and Brimstone. I would expect that KD ratio to probably drop a little bit, maybe into the 0.90s if he has a decent season. Smokes players aren't really known to be getting a lot of kills, and having a KD ratio over 1 for smokes players is relatively rare. Not super rare, but it is. Those players aren't really known for fragging out and getting a lot of kills, so if Whalers can just continue to be a solid player on the smokes, then they should be in a decent spot for that position. Moving on to Logan, he had 1,229 kills, 952 deaths, 319 assists for KD ratio of 1.29. He stuck with 3 characters throughout the entire year, playing Viper, Cypher, and Killjoy. So mainly playing Sentinel with the Cypher and Killjoy, but a little bit of smokes in Viper when they need that double smokes. And it seems like Logan, at least on paper, was their second best player throughout the entire season, and you could probably make a argument for him being better than Takaz. Great numbers for those roles that he played, so I do expect him to still be serviceable in that. Do we see him maybe play a bit more characters, maybe expand on those 3 characters? Maybe, but at the same time, he seems pretty good at those 3 characters, so I don't know if you necessarily need that, but that will depend on this team's results. Moving on to NTank, he had 1,163 kills, 1,126 deaths, 616 assists for KD ratio of 1.03. Characters he played include KO, Breach, Sage, Raze, and Phoenix. So yet again, solid numbers on those roles that he played, playing a little bit of duelist, a little bit of initiator. He was the flex player for them last year, and it seems like he did a decent job at it. 1.03 is a respectable KD ratio when you're looking at these roles, so I do think he should be good for that flex player, but we will see how it shakes out. So looking at these players, I don't exactly know how they're going to stack up against the Tier 1 competition in EMEA. There are some very strong teams, but there are also some teams that maybe seem pretty weak. They were dominant in France. They weren't really favorites going into Ascension, but they ended up playing very, very well. Them not playing in the offseason is a bit concerning, because they might come in cold, but maybe they've been practicing a lot during that offseason. Not playing in offseason events doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. It just means that you're probably trying to keep your strategy secret, and maybe you're not scrimming with teams as much because you're trying to, figure out how to be effective internally versus, showing teams how you play in off-season events or scrims. I'm sure they're scrimming now. I don't know how they're doing in those scrims, but overall it looks like a respectable roster, but maybe one that isn't going to be particularly elite. But if Takaz and Logan can put up similar numbers, then they should be in a good spot. It does kind of seem like this team was a little bit carried by those 2 players, with 2 players having a KD ratio of 1.29 and the rest being just around above 1 for that. So that's not necessarily a sign of the other players struggling. That does mean that they did pretty good, and That's not the only stat that matters, obviously, but it is evident that 2 players were doing really well, fragging out a lot, and just doing great all the time, versus the other players that seemed like they were good with that support, but maybe weren't as elite. And that will probably start to show at the tier 1 level when you're playing against more talented teams. Moving on to their map pool, they had a very good map pool, starting with Haven 7-1 record with attack being 56% win rate and defense being 64. Split solid on it as well, 10-1 record, attack 63, defense was 56. Not really much to say about the worst maps because the maps that they were negative on, they didn't really play that much. Starting with Bind, 1-3 record, attack being 61%, defense was 32. Pearl, 1-2 record, attack was 53, defense was 37. So they had a solid map pool. They are going to be missing Haven this year, but they still should be pretty good on Split. 10-1 record is very respectable. Pearl, they weren't particularly bad on, but now they don't have to worry about it at all, so it doesn't really matter for them. They're going to have to learn how to be better on Bind. They weren't super bad on it with a 1-3 record, but that defense number being 32, that is pretty concerning. But overall, their map pool was solid last year. It was against lesser competition than what we're going to be seeing in Tier 1, so we'll see how they fare in that respect. I don't think this team's going to be particularly bad, but I also don't see them being particularly elite either. But crazier things have happened, and maybe the teams that came through Ascension are going to be dominant and figure out all the other tier 1 competition pretty quickly. We will see. I don't know if I expect this team to just come out guns a-blazing right out of the gate, because it does seem like they haven't been competing in quite some time. So we'll see. But this French roster, I mean, it's probably going to be better than the Carmine Corp roster last year. I mean, that's not really a high bar to set, but they might already be the best French team that we've seen in Valorant so far. So we will see. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think Gentlemates are going to be very dominant and figure out the tier 1 competition right away, or do they struggle a bit and maybe have some growing pains? Please click like if you enjoyed the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.